Okay, let's look at controversy around racism and gender stereotypes, etc. For me as an American male seeking to create a sustainable, mutually fulfilling, loving relationship with a woman. So I had an abusive childhood, and by the time my parents were getting their divorce and I managed to leave the house at age 17 to start my own business, I was very clear about two things. One, romantic relationships, marriage, etc., can be absolute hell, and people can inflict an extraordinary amount of pain on one another. And two, I didn't want to do that. So, in my generation, I'm not sure how rapidly it's changing, but I didn't learn a single hour of emotional literacy in school. I didn't learn a single hour of psychology in school. I didn't learn a single thing about having a healthy romantic relationship in school. And I learned tons of things about how to be abusive from my parents and movies and other things in the culture. So, I was leaving home traumatized at age 17 with $50 in my pocket. So my goal was to develop a competent lifestyle and master all my life skills so that by age 30, I could venture into this delicate area of romantic relationship. I didn't want to be hurt. I didn't want to hurt people. And it just seemed like it's a lot to throw on a 17-year-old's plate. Learn how to start a business, learn how to run a business, learn how to make your customers happy, learn how to live alone in a house, learn how to drive, there's tons of life skills. And so I thought, you can't have a relationship without any money in our culture, the way we've set it up. And so it just seemed like a miserable thing to try and do all that at once. So I said, no relationship till I'm 30. And let's really develop the kind of competency and mastery that would allow me to bring in this new and volatile element called a romantic relationship, and give it my full attention because I've reached mastery in life skills. So that's basically my approach. Now, by age 23, I had built my first house. I was running my own company, and getting my jobs done on time, getting them done on budget, pretty happy clients. And so, at age 26, I met an older woman, an older American, actually a landscaper. And she was interested in me, and she had a lot of experience and spent time with maybe 100 lovers until that point. And it seemed to me that someone knowing what they're doing and being growth-oriented and having time and having a little maturity was far more important than tits and ass. So I said yes. We started long distance. We'd met in Florida. She was in Marin County, California. We'd met in Florida. We talked 2-3 hours a day on the phone. It was great. Lots of learning and development. We'd visit each other back and forth. Great. Though I had trauma and PTSD at the time, and I didn't understand it. And so when she came to visit me, I'd lived alone since I was 17. And I had transferred the helplessness I had felt in abusive relationship with my family into a sense of mastery around things. In other words, when a child naturally bonds and has a strong, healthy bond with both parents. And that's where their security comes from. But when you don't have either a strong or healthy bond with either parents, you have to bond to something that gives you a sense of certainty and control. And so I bonded to things. And in the bonding to things, things carry all the emotional weight that you would typically have within a secure family dynamic, which leads to being micro-controlling. You move that, but it's no longer just a physical object. When you transfer that sense of certainty and stability to things and away from people, now when things change and become chaotic, it's as if your survival and your relationship with people is out of control. And so I had to be careful learning now to invite someone into my house, how to teach her what a big deal these things were. And so I coached her carefully. And again, I much appreciated having an older woman in this situation who didn't take it personally. And most older women who have a lot of experience are intelligent enough to know that when a man coaches you, when a partner coaches you on how to connect and work well versus not, it's a godsend over trying to guess and figure out people's quirks on their own. So she took that attitude and, it made the thing a success. And it was a pretty big deal, to ease into that. And so we had a 2-year relationship. And I took some seminars and, on relationship and sexuality and things like that. I took some seminars and I began putting together, my idea of a dream partner. And I'd worked very hard because I knew the downside. So I'd read books, I'd written things, I'd prepared, I'd, developed some savings, I'd freed up time. I'd done a lot of introspection, therapy, workshops, etc., so that I could be a great partner. And I love to cook. I love to communicate. I take initiative. I love listening to people and, exploring ideas. I love making my partner happy and, had created this beautiful space. And I wasn't meeting women who had been preparing for me since they were 17, who were concerned about not hurting me as a primary value, who were asking me questions and initiating. I was meeting some people that just like, well, just whatever happens, happens, which is like, no, I'm not up for just whatever happening. That was my parents' attitude, and they abused themselves, each other, and every one of the children, and it just happened. And I was not interested in things just happening. I wanted some sense, other than a roll in the dice of whether we were going to be at each other's throats. And so this was a very maddening experience to realize that many of my partners had been abused or in abusive situations, and I would ask them, like, so what went on in your last 2 or 3 relationships? And it wasn't very good a lot of the time. And it's like, well, you got into those relationships just seeing what happened. And not good things didn't happen, or you'd still be there. So why? Maybe there's something wrong with the way you're going about relating, as opposed to that there's no good men out there. Maybe they're just as ignorant emotionally and relationally as you are. And you get put 2 ignorant people together with abusive backgrounds, and statistically it doesn't turn out wonderfully. It turns out wrong 80% of the time. So I've never met the woman who's been preparing for me in the same way. And that was disappointing. I thought for sure I'd meet someone who, was really interested in, having this high growth, prioritized relationship, because it's not just being interested in it, it's being interested in it enough to do the work to make it possible. Meaning if you want to, just as one example, get to know each other's love languages, well, you have to read the book. You don't just luck out into that. You read the book and you talk about it, and then you can learn to cater your behavior to the love language. And so I had some frustration, and I had a number of relationships where I was ending up cooking the food, providing most of the money, providing most of the guidance to see that we didn't get into too much trouble, asking a lot of the questions, patiently waiting while they got to know themselves so that they could tell me. If you ever want to fluster an American woman, just as a little bit of a quip here, just ask them to write a list of 30 things that you could do that if you did them would make them feel totally and completely loved, physically, emotionally, sexually, sensorily, economically, mentally. What is love for them? And what can you do? And I have never gotten anything but puzzled looks, and that's being a little bit harsh. Sometimes I'll get, that's a great question. No one has ever asked me that. And here we come into the stupidity of the United States template for relationships. We do not learn the most basic things we need to know about ourselves in school. In fact, the only thing we learn from school is to suppress our intelligence to such a level that we could really think that see cat run is more relevant to our lives than being able to educate our friends and partners on how to love and be loving in a way that is profoundly powerful. Now, I still have a fair amount of bitterness around all of this because I've been approached by 5 women in my life. I have approached about 10,000. Well, that's a crappy ratio. It's tiring. A majority of women default to expecting me to pay for them, while they also default, it's kind of this double negative thing where I'm supposed to pay for them because I'm a man, and I'm supposed to be grateful to touch their body because I'm a man. And I'm the one spending the money, and I'm usually the one doing most of the things that creates the pleasure. I'm the one asking, what's the way that you like to be touched? And I'm the one choreographing and saying, is like this, like this, like this. They're not doing that to me. And it gets tiring to have this blind spot of, we're better than you on the one hand, which is why you should be lucky to have sex with me. Okay, so we're better than. But even though we're better than, we can't make it financially. We can't contribute even an equal amount, let alone more. That's the one kind of thing. And then we're better than, but we can't be as good a lover as we want you to be. Okay, that's a bit odd. And we're better than because of our, we know our feelings and all this, but you can't tell me what makes you feel totally and completely loved? And, I should relax and be, da-da-da-da-da, and just take care of all the areas that you've relaxed so much that you're not competent. It's a weight. Someone's got to hold the weight, or the relationship deteriorates and leads to pain. And that doesn't even seem to have occurred to you. So I'm holding all of that weight, and I don't want to. I don't want to be in a relationship in the dynamic where I'm holding most of the weight within a politically correct framework in which I need to be holding additional weight to help you feel good about yourself so as not to be chauvinistic. So this is very painful, because I think human beings are equal, but they're not equally competent. And I got tired of this trend within the United States. So I decided to go around the world and see if I could break the trend. In Europe, I found Copenhagen and Italy had some promise, but not much. But still, 200-300% more than the United States. So we get into stereotypes where the way I do it, the way I develop my profiles of countries and cultures in this arena is, first of all, I look at the ratio. If I have 5 or 6 online profiles in different parts of the world, I see who reaches out to me at what ratio and who doesn't reach out at all. So within the United States, it's pretty low reach out of all, of Copenhagen, Italy, Philippines, and Thailand. Philippines reaches out 10 times more than any other country. Next comes Thailand, then comes Copenhagen, then comes Italy. Then comes, way distant second, Bay Area, San Francisco. So this is a statistical thing. You just create a profile, and the same profile, and you see where's the response. And this is, many women have made a very bizarre mistake thinking that I'm doing all this and having relationships so that I can be an anthropologist, as opposed to it's so difficult to find a compatible partner that I'm ending up with a lot of anthropological data simply in the process of trying to find a compatible mate. And being willing to move beyond race and beyond nationality to do so, so that it can be sustainable. So, having just noticed that the Philippines was 1,000% more responsive, that's one thing. But, every culture has its pros and cons. And so I've talked, as I said, I've had more than 10,000 interactions with different people from around the world and spent time with roughly 100 lovers, in different places. And this gives me statistical samplings on honesty level. For example, I can say that the Philippines is the least honest of all those cultures by, let's see, at least 50%, but 1,000 times more, outreach. And I can say that the Thais are among the most emotionally present and among the most confident in their femininity. In fact, I would say that. I can say that the that Americans are the most mentally literate in this terrain, with Denmark kind of being in that same league. And Russians are superior, meaning the statistical data of Russians it's an amazing niche. If you want to do something that is very intelligent and very unusual and very direct, engage with a Russian. There's no better place that I've found, which is why I've had several very unusual, valuable, and interesting interactions with Russians, despite knowing almost none of them and doing almost no outreach. You know, as an example, in the Bay Area, I once sent out 305 invitations to anyone who wanted to consciously create a peak experience. This was just in desperation, you know, forget about someone preparing for an amazing monogamous relationship with 30 hours a week who was interested in growth and wanted to show up as equal partner and blah, blah, blah. Forget all that. You know, could we at least consciously design a peak experience together? Well, I got a contact improv dancer from America in her 30s, gorgeous and lovely experience, and a Russian out of 305. And all the people who criticized the idea, of which there were several Americans, or all American. Now, the Russian said, and she's probably the only Russian in the sampling. I mean, I wasn't looking for Russians. I was looking for friendly faces. There aren't that many Russians, you know, in the Bay Area. And so she's probably out of 305, probably the only Russian I contacted. She said, this sounded so good, I almost thought it wasn't true. Because it sounded too good to be true. Of course, I'm interested in creating a peak experience. And we did. And it was incredible. So that just gives you, that gives you a window. And then 324 Americans had something better to do than consciously create a peak experience. Go figure. It reminds me of a conversation I had in the plane with someone. I said, do you want to spend the time in the plane figuring out how to make each other very happy? She said, nah, I'm not interested in being happy. I said, fine. Enjoy the mediocrity of the plane ride. There's almost a suspicion in the United States that you've been had if you have a wonderful experience. And I'm not sure where this comes from. Could be elements of feminism or who knows. But of all the places to spend relaxed quality time, Thailand stands out. Now, you know, so there's pros and cons. There's, nobody speaks any English in Thailand as a general rule. So, but I can spend more quality time with strangers in a very satisfying way in Thailand in a month than I can in an entire year after all, you know, after 15 years of contacts and thousands of outreaches in the Bay Area. I can spend more quality time spontaneously and magnificently, really rich time in a month than I can in a year. So that's a 1,200% or, you know, difference, you know, right there. That's huge. That's worth the 18-hour flight. So I end up with lots of data, and I'm me the whole time. So I'm just me, trying to create win-win healthy interactions, figuring it out as an emotionally illiterate, relationally illiterate American, reading, studying, writing, sharing this, that, and the other. And so one of the things that I've discovered is that while there is an enormous amount of relational suffering worldwide, there is no demographic that I've found that wants to take conscious responsibility for understanding and precluding that suffering systematically. No place in the world that I've found where people want, as a group, to consciously negotiate a healthy ending at the beginning of the relationship, which is really the only time you have before you become very attached and it's hard to talk about the thing without it being triggering just to talk about. No place like that. There is no place where people consciously talk as a group around how to create a peak experience. There's no place where you have an intelligent sequence of data exchange other than OkCupid. And OkCupid is mostly, American-based, but it's also, anyway, motivation is very, very low in many OkCupid exchanges. And so, you do learn useful things on OkCupid, like, do you like to cuddle holding arm in arm, or do you like to cuddle in different bed, or to sleep in different beds, or sleeping apart? That's a really big question that anyone should know, because that's a third of your whole life is sleeping. 8 hours a night, you're either going to be compatible or incompatible. And it's not 8 hours of sex, it's 8 hours of sleeping. So the sleep dynamic is really important. And people don't even figure that out, but that's going to affect you more than a college degree will. And people are interested, what's your degree in, what's this and that. They're not interested in, let's spend a night sleeping together so that we can gauge on a 1 to 10, how was the process of sleeping? That's a good thing to do. A first sleep, together. So, there's so much stuff that needs to happen that doesn't happen. And when I talk, I'm very aware, American women, Thai women, etc. I'm looking at statistical samplings of these things. I'm not talking about individuals, but I'm also talking outside of the frame of reference of most of the people that I'm talking to. Because unfortunately, I've never met anyone who's had 10,000 relationship interactions, is interested in specific values, is highly motivated to have a peak relationship, and that's traveled around the world with that in mind. And so, this is a triggering topic for that reason.